State Foreign Operations and related programs will come to order. I welcome our distinguished colleagues. It's a pleasure to have you join us for our first hearing of the year. And as we begin crafting the fiscal year 2021 Appropriations Bill, your testimony will be integral to our process. The democracy, development, diplomacy, humanitarian, and security assistance programs funded in this bill are critical to maintaining United States global leadership, protecting our national security, and promoting economic growth. Yet, since coming to office, the President has repeatedly proposed cutting these programs. Fortunately, Congress has consistently and not resoundingly rejected the administration's cuts. For fiscal year 2021, the President's request included a 20% cut that would decimate United States diplomatic development and humanitarian efforts. A bipartisan majority in Congress has rejected short-sighted cuts to overseas programs, and I'm confident will do so again. That is why I appreciate each of you who are here and those who are coming, making the time to testify and draw attention to these critical programs, the very programs that protect our national security and uphold our foreign policy priorities. So thank you for coming. I look forward to hearing about your priorities in the State and Foreign Operations Bill. And at this point, I would like to turn to my ranking member, Mr. Rogers, for any comments he may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this meeting so we can hear from our colleagues on their fiscal 21 priorities in the State Foreign Operations Bill. In the weeks ahead, we will hear from the administration's senior leadership on the details of the President's budget request for State Foreign Operations, including the impact of the so-called proposed 19% cut. Once we've heard from all the witnesses, I look forward to working with you, Madam Chair, on a bill that provides more realistic funding levels in support of U.S. soft power that advances our national security. Many important programs in the bill. I'm pleased to get to hear from members who have wishes to include in the bill. We thank them for their participation, and we look forward to hearing from them. I yield back.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to welcome Representative Espaillat of New York. He is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you for joining us today, and we will be happy to place your full testimony into the record. If you would be kind enough to summarize your written statement, I want to be sure we have enough time to get any questions. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. In this hearing, I lay out my priorities as they relate to the State Department and related agencies. As someone that was born in the Caribbean as a member of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I know that maintaining our foreign aid and diplomatic commitments ensures that we are favorably positioned in that region. That region happens to be our third border. I would like to begin by discussing our efforts to combat crime and illicit trafficking in the Caribbean. I thank the committee for the $2 million increase in the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative received last year, but I'm here to share why the need is even greater. The Caribbean is particularly susceptible to drug trade as a midway point for narcotics produced in South America on their way to the United States, where unfortunately the demand is very high. Stopping narcotics coming through the Caribbean is important not only for combating the drug problem in the U.S., but for promoting stability in Caribbean countries. According to a status report of the State Department's U.S. Strategic Strategy for Engagement in the Caribbean released in July of 2019, that report states that the Caribbean has some of the highest murder rates in the world. Rising crime and endemic corruption threaten government's abilities to provide security and good governance. With continued efforts to combat the drug trade in Central America and Mexico, the lack of of comparable investment in the Caribbean makes the already susceptible region a flashpoint for the smuggling of Colombia cocaine, which has quadrupled its production since 2012. The CBSI has been instrumental in providing needed help to combat the drug trade, work to lower crime and violence rates, and stand against corruption. However, the CBSI's funding level is insufficient to meet the continuing and growing need. As such, I urge this committee to provide at least $80 million for the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, fiscal year 21. I would also like to discuss the global and existential challenge of our time, climate change. We see the effects every day, from polluting in the Harlem River that causes asthma, to drought in the Northern Triangle that leads to insecurity and migration. Developing countries which contribute the least to climate change, but often bear the greatest burden, need the help to build capacity and mitigate and adapt to climate change. Their share of the burden greatly outweighs their contribution to the problem, whereas developed countries contribute immensely to climate change, but bear less of a burden. This is a global environmental injustice. The Green Climate Fund is a means to help developing countries reach their full mitigating potential and combat climate change. The U.S. has committed $3 billion to the fund, but has only contributed $1 billion. There is no greater need than to combat climate change, and I, the committee that I at least begin against America's commitment to leadership goals, global climate change. As such, I urge the committee to provide $750 million, the last ask under the past administration, to the Green Climate Fund. I thank you for hearing my concerns on priorities. I have submitted additional testimony in writing to the committee, which I hope you would also be able to take into consideration. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your very thoughtful testimony. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Representative Mcgovern of Massachusetts, the chairman of the Rules Committee, I am happy you are able to join us. And of course, you can put your full testimony into the record, and if you would be kind enough to summarize your written statement, I want to make sure we have enough time to get to any questions.
Thank you very much. I want to, Madam Chair, thank you, and Ranking Member Rogers, thank you.
Can you hear this?
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
I'm in sense around now.
That's very good.
Okay, good, okay, beautiful. All right. Well, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Rogers, thank you, Norma Torres, my colleague on the Rules Committee as well. Thanks for having me here. I want to begin by touching on a couple of items included in the FY 2020 bill. I want to thank you for designating $1 million to support Conabuskara, which is an organization that I helped establish that is dedicated to the search for the disappeared from the Salvadoran Civil War. This affects many Salvadoran American families as well as the people of El Salvador. It is important. It's an important effort to bring to closure their suffering. They don't know the whereabouts of missing family members, and to help heal the wounds of that war. I also want to thank you for the strong language directing the State Department to coordinate across all U.S. agencies the release of all relevant files or documents related to the 1981 El Mozote massacre in El Salvador. I visited that site. Over 1,000 people were massacred, mostly women and children. Some children were literally infants, and they were massacred by Salvadoran soldiers and buried in shallow graves. The Salvadoran presiding judge in the El Mozote case, Jorge Guzman, sent a letter to Secretary Pompeo expressing gratitude for the initiative that Congress put forward. That letter was hand-delivered to the Western Hemisphere Affairs Bureau the first week of February, and in his letter, Judge Guzman noted what types of documents and information would be most useful to his review of the case and the U.S. agencies where such files might be located. And I respectfully ask the committee to follow up and ensure that the funds for Conobuska to be allocated in a timely manner as well. I also ask that the committee be persistent and uncompromising in making sure that the State Department complies fully and expeditiously with your directive on the El Mozote case. Resolving this case would be a tremendous step in breaking impunity and advancing justice in El Salvador. I should just also say, I think we have a special obligation on this case because the soldiers who were responsible for this massacre, the battalion, the Atlacat battalion, was actually was formed by the United States, and we trained many of these soldiers, and we certainly armed them. I'm also grateful for the one-time increase of $250,000 to upgrade the Congressional Executive Commission on China Prisoner Database, which hasn't been updated since 2004. Currently, the CECC, which I'm the chair of, is working with contractors to create a new political prisoner database, preserve and transfer existing data, and support and maintain the system in both English and Chinese. For fiscal year 2021, I'm requesting the traditional level of $2 million for the CECC. My priorities for fiscal year 2021 are similar to last year: robust funding for the global food security programs, including increasing to $200 million the nutrition account under the global health programs, maintaining current levels for Colombia, and the final bill did a very fine job of targeting and designating funds for Colombia last year. In FY 2021, we need to continue to focus on the full implementation of the peace accords, promoting human rights, protecting local social leaders, and advancing sustainable community-based rural development, especially in those areas most affected by nearly 60 years of war and violence. In Central America, U.S. aid needs to emphasize human rights, rule of law, good governance, and ending corruption and official engagement in criminal activity. Madam Chair, I'm deeply concerned about the fate of human rights and democracy in Central America. I travel there often. Young people and families confront a violent landscape. Daily, they are threatened with death to join gangs, enter sexual slavery, and pay extortion. I hope that the committee would formally recognize that these countries struggling to overcome persistent violence, poverty, corruption, and institutional weakness provide neither safety nor security for their own people. Last year, Ranking Member Rogers expressed frustration about years of U.S. funding in the fight against drugs in South America. I agree. In Colombia, drug and criminal violence remains pervasive, yet over 99,000 small farmers have come forward in support of the peace accord and declared that they will stop growing illegal crops. They have literally put their lives on the line for peace, but they can't succeed without the full engagement of the Colombian government and real protection by the Colombian security forces. Regrettably, neither the Colombian government nor the U.S. have stepped up to the plate and provided the necessary support and resources for the rural development and counter-drug strategy detailed in the peace accord. Lack of progress and even setbacks to reducing illegal crops comes less from campesino farmers than the lack of political will by the civilian and military authorities. We've seen that aerial fumigation does not stop the cultivation of coca. What is needed is the full and lasting presence of the state in these formerly ungoverned places. These rural communities need to be able to count on democratic governance, financing for alternative livelihoods, rule of law, schools and health clinics, and the protection of their local social leaders. It requires a long-term commitment, but should it work, the results will not only address drug trafficking, but expand the benefits of democracy and development throughout Colombia. So I end here, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Rogers, and welcome you. Thank you for your time, and welcome any questions or comments or whatever.
Do you have any questions?
Briefly, if the chair would yield. Two things. A reminder, the current government in Colombia, I think, is having the right policies in place. And they're beginning to bend the curve on coca production through eradication and interdiction. So they've got a long ways to go, but at least I think we're seeing the beginnings of the right kind of result.
Yeah, well, I respectfully would disagree that they're making the progress on the drug front that we all hope. They seem to be going back to the same old policies that were once used in a previous by the previous government under President Uribe, where they're going back to aerial fumigation, which didn't stop anything. I mean, these small farmers, what they need is crop substitution. They need alternatives. Because if not, they're just going to end up finding other ways to be engaged in illegal activity. And we know that, what works, we know that, that President Duque just canceled the agreement with the United Nations to continue with a program that has been actually very effective in getting small farmers out of the business of growing illegal crops. I don't know why he did that, but I think that's a step backwards. We know that works. We have the statistics to show that it works. We ought to embrace that. There's no shortcut to solving Colombia's problems, but I will be honest with you. I'm not as enamored with the Colombian government as you just stated. So I'm very concerned about them moving backwards, and also the increase in violence and the focus of attacks on social leaders. That's not a good thing.
Well, if you noticed, my words were faint praise for Colombia.
Yeah.
You asked for the regular $2 million for the China Commission. Since we started this, the role of China in the world economically has changed quite dramatically. Has that fact impacted the Commission's work?
Well, it has. I mean, the Commission's focus is on human rights, and after we provided most favored nations status to China, we wanted to make sure that we didn't, forget about human rights. And the Commission has, I think, done a very, very good job. And right now, we're concerned about what's happening in China with regard to the treatment of the Uyghurs. We have people who are telling us that the camps in which Uyghurs are being forced into, their treatment might constitute crimes against humanity. We're concerned about China's role in trying to undercut Hong Kong, which, by the way, would have a negative impact on the global economy. We want China to keep its word when they talked about one country, two systems. They're going in the wrong direction. We're concerned about China's treatment of Tibetans. They're trying to destroy Tibetan culture, and now interjecting themselves in who will be the next Dalai Lama. They're actually saying that the government, not the Tibetans, should be responsible for who is the next Dalai Lama, and certainly that is a violation of religious freedom and is something that we should all condemn. So, we recognize that China is playing a bigger role in global affairs, economically and militarily, but our job is to focus on human rights and make sure we don't forget that.
We included $250,000 in the 020 bill for an upgrade of the database on political prisoners. How is that coming, and when can we get it?
Well, as I mentioned, we are trying to get that. We're asking for the money to do just that, to update it, because it is, quite frankly, not particularly usable. It is there, but you need, to get through it all is a challenge. We want to make this user-friendly so that people have access to this relatively easily, not just those who are monitoring human rights, but businesses, members of Congress. So we have a plan to go forward, but that's what we need the money to upgrade the quality of the database so it's actually usable.
Well, that's why we gave it to you in 020. So where are we?
I think we are moving in the right direction. I can assure you of that. But I'm not sure we have the. I may be. Yeah. I know we're interviewing firms to try to get it upgraded, but we are getting there.
That's really not much of an answer.
Well, my understanding is that that we haven't had access to the money yet to do that, and I think that's what one of the requests that I'm making here today is to make sure we have the adequate resources to basically modernize the whole system. The staff is working very hard at compiling information. We're trying to make the Commission more user-friendly. For example, the Commission has been around for some time now. They issue yearly reports that are actually very, very good. They're detailed, but they're thick, and my guess is that most people up here don't read them. We continue to issue the thick report. We're now issuing executive summaries so that there's no excuse to not read them. On the database, which is quite extensive, we want it to be user-friendly and useful in a way where people can, get access to it, without having to, hire a research assistant to spend a week going through it. The whole point of compiling a list of political prisoners is to make sure that people know the extent of China's brutality, and that they are imprisoning people for, everything from, being a human rights defender to practicing their religion to being a member of the LGBTQ community to you name it. So I'm very proud of the work of the China Commission. And we're happy to sit down with your staff to go over the details on the database, but I assure you we are doing everything we can to get it updated and upgraded.
Thank you. Representative Spamberger of Virginia, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, thank you for testifying.
And before I leave, I just want to say to the chairwoman, I'm not sure if I'm going to ever, you'll probably be before the Rules Committee, but I'm not sure I'll be coming before you again in your current capacity. And I just want to thank you for all the incredible work that you have done on behalf of vulnerable people all over the world. I mean, you have an incredible legacy that you should be proud of, and we're certainly all proud to serve with you. So thank you.
Thank you. And you've been an invaluable partner, and I appreciate your kind words.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good
Thank
afternoon.
you for coming here before us. And you could summarize or read the whole thing, whatever you prefer.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, for your leadership on this subcommittee. And thank you, Ranking Member Rogers. I appreciate the opportunity to address the subcommittee or to address the State Foreign Operations Related Programs Subcommittee today. The mission of this subcommittee is very important to me. As someone who's devoted my entire career to strengthening national security, I am aware of the proven benefits of strategic diplomacy and targeted foreign assistance. And as you know, the success of these efforts is wholly dependent on the capacity, equipment, and training of those who are going overseas and representing U.S. interests abroad, our diplomats, our public servants. These Americans have demonstrated time and time again that they deserve our full support. I was a former CIA case officer. As part of that training, I went through intense training at what's known as the farm, where we practiced event after event how to react to challenging circumstances, how to keep ourselves safe, how to keep others safe. And when I was overseas, I witnessed the immense dedication of my State Department counterparts who worked tirelessly in the pursuit of U.S. foreign policy objectives. The work of our diplomats is vital, and the dedication of our nation's diplomatic security agents has protected not just our nation's diplomats and embassies, but the very members of Congress in this room who've traveled abroad on congressional delegation trips. State Department officers and DS agents around the world serve in challenging locations under immense pressure and with one unifying commitment to service. As a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm committed to advancing smart national security strategy, and part of this strategy is the need to ensure that we are properly training our diplomatic professionals. And given the range of risks that these public servants face while they are serving abroad, that must include intense and regular training to counter the threats to their personal security and U.S. national security interests. In my district, Virginia's 7th District, we are proud to be home of State Department's new Foreign Affairs Security Training Center, or FASC, as we call it locally. It's located at Fort Pickett near the town of Blackstone in Nottoway County, Virginia. FASC's mission is to be the premier training center for members of the U.S. foreign affairs community who risk so much to serve our nation overseas. I encourage you all to visit the facility. It is a remarkable new facility, and it has impressive capacity to train its employees. I'd like to thank the appropriators as well as the many members of Congress who advocated for the creation of FASC long before my arrival in Congress, because following a 2008 report to Congress, lawmakers saw the pressing need for a consolidated high-tech security training facility, and they acted to fill this void. Through the process, Virginia lawmakers and others put the work in to make FASC a reality. After opening on Fort Pickett in November 2019, FASC is now meeting the need of security and personnel training that was identified a decade ago. FASC provides life-saving security training to thousands of diplomatic security personnel and other members of the U.S. foreign affairs community. With this training, they are more prepared to identify, prevent, and respond to a wide range of security risks to U.S. personnel and U.S. citizens, and we are honored to be the home district of such a critical mission. However, while this state-of-the-art facility is training hundreds of government employees each week, FASI still faces several barriers in reaching its full potential, and that's the subject of what I'd like to discuss. The facility was originally designed not only to serve the critical national security function, one that has become even more necessary as we've witnessed attacks on U.S. embassies and American citizens and heightened security risks, but also consolidated training that would generate cost savings for the federal government. Previously, members of the Diplomatic Security Service were training at multiple different facilities across the country. This is a consolidated effort that it not only was meant to be beneficial from a fiscal standpoint, but also from an experience of training. Those cost savings have really not yet been realized, and FASI has not yet achieved its maximum potential in terms of a comprehensive training experience. Right now, trainees are being bussed in from hotels that are more than an hour away. I represent a long, thin district in Central Virginia, and FASI is putting trainees in hotels in the Richmond, Virginia suburbs and then putting them on country roads headed south for at least an hour's drive, sometimes crossing through the city of Richmond if it's on the northern side, sometimes avoiding the city of Richmond. There are no hotels or eating established nearby that can meet the needs of the hundreds of trainees at FASI, and that means that diplomatic security agents and other trainees, they're bringing their own lunch, they're spending 3 hours on buses, and it is impacting the training experience. These are wasted hours and frankly wasted dollars chartering buses, renting hotels. We should all be concerned about the remaining deficiencies and how they could impair the security of American personnel around the world. But we don't have to accept these gaps. We can fix them while improving cost effectiveness. So it's imperative that we take affirmative next steps towards fulfilling the subcommittee's original vision for FASI, both as a top-notch national security training facility and as an engine of local economic development. In the coming months, I look forward to working with the subcommittee and my colleagues in Congress on this issue. There is an opportunity to do better by both the American taxpayer and our diplomatic professionals, and it starts with lawmakers delivering on the initial promise that was the idea of FATSI. And as the appropriation process proceeds, I'll be working to address this challenge. I'm proud to have this critical diplomatic security facility in Central Virginia, and I'm committed to making it more effective on behalf of the public servants who train there and the American communities they serve. If we're not focused on preparing the next generation of diplomats and diplomatic security agents, it's not just an understatement to say we'll be putting all Americans in jeopardy. These investments have real short-term implications for our ability to deal with the threats of tomorrow, and they have real long-term impacts on the investments we as a country are making. State Department training is critical to all aspects of our national security, and I hope the members of this subcommittee recognize this. I believe very much in the work that happens in Nottoway County at Fort Pickett at FASI. I've personally taken an oath to defend this country 3 times and its values, and I know that my colleagues in the Foreign Service have done the same. I look forward to working with you all in the future, and I thank you for paying attention to what is happening in FASI and some of the challenges that are being created by the circumstances of the training facility.
Let me thank you for testifying before us, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for your expertise and your unique set of, shall we say, abilities that are not shared by members in the Congress. So you are an invaluable asset, and I thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you whenever it's convenient. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Madam
Mr.
Chairwoman.
Rogers.
No questions.
Thank you,
Thank you.
and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Representative Costa of California, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, thank you for joining us today, and we'll be happy to place your full testimony in the record if you would be kind enough to summarize your written statement, and then if you have time for any questions, we may just have some.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairperson and members of the subcommittee here on state and foreign operations. Clearly, I must say you and your staff have a great view and on a good day. But as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, I'm going to share some thoughts with you on, I believe, some appropriation funding issues that you're familiar with already, but let me underline them. And as you deal with the difficult task of attempting to put together the Appropriations Committee's priorities for spending in the next fiscal year, I hope that you'll consider these among your list of priorities that I think are important, and again, that reflect, I think, America's needs in terms of our foreign policy priorities that are important. First, nutritional aid. You know, our foreign aid assistance effort is a very small percentage of our nation's budget, but I think it is critically important that we, in fact, show leadership around the world. And it is a part of, I think, under our State Department's policy and efforts with our embassies around the world and our partnerships and our alliances with the European Union and others, a important part of smart power that adds credibility and influence in a troubled world that we live in where there are lots of challenges. The fact is that the nutritional aid has for decades been an important part of the smart power. It focuses on programs that are related to the appropriations you're considering. In the 2021 budget request, the President, I believe, needlessly zeroes out the funding for critical programs that include Food for Peace. This is a program that has existed for decades, that has had overwhelmingly bipartisan support and has had support of previous Republican and Democratic administrations alike. It provides life-saving food assistance for some of the world's most vulnerable people in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, Southeast Asia. So I think it's not only our moral obligation to provide humanitarian assistance, that we work in conjunction with our partners in Europe and the European Union, but it's good public policy, because food security, we know, is fundamental to national security in some of these countries that are so challenged internally. It's part of our smart power. And so I strongly urge this committee to robustly fund the nutritional assistance programs in the fiscal year 2021, and Food for Peace is a part of one of those programs, and you're familiar, I know, with them. Let me also separately talk about a separate funding that I know the Chairman of the Rules Committee just spoke to you a moment ago, and that is the demining and operations that not only affect Nagorno-Karabakh, but other areas where people are at risk. This deals clearly with nonproliferation, anti-terrorism, and demining to related NADAR programs in the fiscal year 2021 appropriations. This was another, I think, tremendous cut that was made as a part of the President's 2021 budget request that I disagree with. Let me give you some examples that I think you're familiar with. The Conventional Weapons Destruction Subaccount has saved lives across the globe, and this funding has gone towards addressing humanitarian impacts of landmines and explosive remnants of war that ultimately combat proliferation of small arms and larger weapon systems. Whether we're talking about parts of the Middle East that we're very familiar with, certainly we and the United Nations and others have attempted to try to deal with this issue. We've seen success with this account, especially towards the legacy ordinances in places like Angola. I think this funding can and has proven to save lives, and when we do our part, I think it's reflected. Other places around the globe are in desperate need of funding, spanning from Vietnam to the republic I said is Nagorno-Karabakh, which is very important to many of my constituents who are of Armenian background. I think it's our moral duty as a nation to continue to lead this humanitarian effort, and I strongly urge this committee to robustly fund the nonproliferation, anti-terrorism, demining, and related programs in the fiscal year 2021 as Congressman Mcgovern and others have also supported. These programs are critical across the globe as we try to strive for peace and democracy as we try to stabilize troubled areas. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you very much. I remember my trip to Nagorno-Karabakh you've been there. I'm
Yes.
sure, quite a few years ago. It was an experience I will never forget.
Yes.
So I thank you for appearing before us. Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Rogers, and my colleague and classmate, Mr. Fort Mary, and I don't know where you want me to submit the testimony for the record.
Madam Chair, could I interject one thing?
Of course.
You noted the view. Do you know what's straight that way? It's Nebraska, almost straight that way, and then where he
You
lives.
keep going, you
keep
get to
going.
California.
Yeah.
And I think probably you all know the history, but the front of the Capitol is the east steps, and this is considered looking west, obviously not the place where...
Washington Monument, isn't that out there?
Right, but up until President Reagan, and it's the president's choice to have their inauguration, had traditionally been on the east steps. And President Reagan and Mike Deaver, who always had the eye for the photo op, thought, you know, this is a much better view. And he was a California governor, and he thought it was appropriate to look west. And he made that change, and since then every president-elect has chosen to have their inauguration looking west.
How do you like that? That's very interesting.
Yes. But
I'm just going to write that down so I don't forget it, because it's a long story. That's a view from a window of my office.
It's amazing. Congressman Costa brought this up because every time I walk in the room, too, I think, not of that particular story, but I think we're looking straight west, straight
Yeah.
at Nebraska.
Well, but this is not considered the front of the Capitol. Interesting, the front of the Capitol is
yeah.
considered these steps.
But I didn't realize every president has
Up
this-
until Reagan. So I think it's from Monroe until Jimmy Carter,
And Reagan went to the east.
to the west steps. Every president from Monroe, I believe, until Ronald Reagan had theirs. If you look at the Franklin Roosevelt, if you look at John F. Kennedy, in 1961 it had snowed, and Robert Frost gave the poem, and there were about 45,000 people out on the east steps, and that 1865 portrait of Lincoln in his second term, that incredible speech that he gave, now is the time to heal the wounds of a nation, and with malice toward none and charity for all. And 60 feet down below was an actor by the name of John Wilkes Booth that 30 days later would kill him. But that's where all the inaugurations were until President Reagan said, this is a better view. And of course, it's an amphitheater because the way it's constructed with the steps. And then, of course, you can have a lot more people this way. I'm not going to get into the photographs and the accounts of how many people were there in 2010 versus 2018. I think that's well documented.
So I wasn't aware of that Reagan
Chose.
first
Yeah.
chose the west.
Yeah. So,
Well, thank you very much.
all right. Well, thank you. And I appreciate the good work you do, always. Okay?
Where is he? Oh, there he is. We welcome Representative Hill of Arkansas, a member of the Financial Services Committee, and I thank you very much for testifying. And I hope you were here for that history lesson.
I was, and I enjoyed it. I've stood out there on many a cold day since 1980.
Thank
Well,
you.
Chair Lowy, thank you for your years of service to our Congress and to the American people. It's a pleasure to be before you today, and my friend, Mr. Rogers, good to be with both of you. I want to talk to you on this subject of religious freedom and tolerance that Jim Mcgovern broached a few minutes ago. I want to thank you for including language in FY 2020 in the committee report regarding efforts to ensure religious freedom and tolerance for Christian communities in Egypt. and for the opportunity to testify in front of you today about this year's request and regarding the treatment of Christians in Egypt. The report language I intend to request would require the Department of State to report to Congress on the steps that the Egyptian government is taking to ensure proper treatment and justice for Christian communities in their country. The report shall include information on church restoration, Christian participation in government, the history of persecution against Egyptian Christians, and the status of Egyptian Christians being held in detention by the government. My interest in making this request comes from my work on House Resolution HRES 49, supporting Coptic Christians in Egypt, which has a diverse and bipartisan coalition of co-sponsors. My Democratic lead on HRES 49 is my friend Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman David Cicilline of Rhode Island. Resolution has 71 co-sponsors, including 25 from House Foreign Affairs and Grace Ming from this subcommittee. I introduced this resolution in the 115th Congress following a 2017 visit to Egypt. While preparing for the trip, visiting the country, and returned home, I heard repeatedly about the plight of Coptic Christians in Egypt. Although the Copts have been victims of numerous terrorist attacks by groups like ISIS, what's more disturbing to me is the attacks against Copts carried out by their fellow Egyptians. There's a persistent narrative in Minya province, located in Upper Egypt. The 2018 and 2019 State Department reports on religious freedom in Egypt mention Minya province as an area of concern more than any other province in the country. Also in late November, Rami Kamil, a Coptic Christian and founder of the Coptic Christian Rights Organization, was arrested by the Egyptian police and has been accused of numerous terrorism charges. He remains in detention. Unfortunately, cases like this in Egypt are becoming more numerous. Egypt is a key partner nation in the fight against terrorism, and we are grateful for their commitment to Camp David and their cooperation with Israel to defeat terrorists operating in the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt, however, is the second highest receiver of annual military aid in the world, and our government holds Egypt to a higher standard as it relates to our sustained aid. I believe we must ensure that we uphold and protect religious freedom and liberty around the world as the gatekeepers of federal spending. I request that the Appropriations Committee include this report language in the FY 2021 bill in order to support that objective. I thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Rogers. I appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
And thank you for appearing here today.
Indeed, on the west side of the Capitol.
I don't have any questions. Do you, sir?
Please, yes. I thank the gentleman for his testimony and his urgent plea with us. I took a delegation to Egypt in 2017, and we were meeting that Sunday morning with President Sisi in the palace when the first of two church bombings took place, the Coptic church bombings. His advisors came in and whispered to his ear what had happened. So we learned of it at the same time. Palm Sunday, and these were Coptic churches. It had a deep impact, I think, on the government, starting with the president. I know there are challenges, and I thank you for raising them. But there's also some progress, I think, being made on religious freedom in Egypt. Just last month, our ambassador, along with senior Egyptian government officials, attended the opening of a historic synagogue that had just completed a major restoration project, led and partially funded by the government. On Christmas Eve last year, President Sisi joined the Coptic Pope for Mass at a Coptic cathedral and called for unity. But I can assure you we will continue to press the issue. You're exactly right to urge that this language be included. As I'm sure you know, our relationship with Egypt and the role Egypt plays in the region, critical, important. That's why I believe it's important to continue to press for improvement in a respectful manner on a range of issues where there are still challenges. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate that, Mr. Rogers. I want to say that I agree with you. President El-Sisi has led from the top on this issue, and he should be given credit for his strong speech at Al-Azhar, the large Islamic well-known university, with the Grand Imam about the need for religious tolerance and changing the policies. And his grief for the loss of Coptic Christians and the brutality at St. Peter and St. Paul Church in Cairo is genuine. He's built the largest Coptic cathedral in the world now at the new administrative center outside Cairo. So I think President El-Sisi is on the right track, but as President Reagan said, human rights and religious tolerance is not social work. It's a fundamental tenet of American foreign policy. And so I agree with you that we should, in the most diplomatic and professional tone, maintain this press that we have in order to give President El-Sisi that deep commitment that we have, that he gets changes throughout Egypt. Egypt's nearly 100 million people now. Copts are 15% of the population. And so while there have been really progress on church reconstruction, synagogue reconstruction, and leadership from the top, we want to make sure that we maintain our views with Egypt in a firm manner in this regard to make sure that all Christians in Egypt receive the tolerance and respect they deserve. But thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank
yield
you.
back.
Thank you. Representative Jackson Lee of Texas, a senior member of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me to both.
Place your full testimony in the record, and if you'd be kind enough to summarize your written statement, we'd be appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me, on the record, thank the Chairwoman, Ms. Lowey, and certainly the ranking member, Mr. Rogers, and all of the staff. This is an important committee, as has always been one of the major opportunities for America to interact with the world. So thank you for the leadership you've given. I'm going to start with the well-known issue of the day that does have an international impact, and that is the coronavirus. I am a member of the Homeland Security Committee. I spoke in my district in the beginning of February on this issue and concerns about whether this nation was prepared. We have seen now, obviously, a soldier that has been out of the country who's been diagnosed. We see another individual in the country diagnosed. But my concern is, as it relates to the international arena, is the infrastructure in some of our developing nations, and in particular the continent of Africa. I, for a long time, advocated building an infrastructure of hospitals in Africa. And so I'm just generally going to speak to the question of how imperative it is now that our allies and partners in the developing world have diagnostic equipment, medical supplies, doctors, workers, hospitals, and any other additional resources as they might begin to address the coronavirus. I know that there is the World Health Organization, but in my interaction on the continent, one of the things most noticeable in Africa, in the countries in Africa, is their lack of a viable hospital system. I would hope that in the appropriations process, we might consider seeding that as we look to the amount of money that is coming from another committee, but overlapping in this committee, dealing with the coronavirus. Let me also indicate my support, $70 billion for the international affairs budget, and I will summarize, that really reinforces the three-pronged approach to diplomacy, to fight terrorism, supporting our allies, build new markets for U.S. goods and services, combat pandemics, and provide life-saving humanitarian assistance. And I think the international affairs budget, just 1% of the total federal budget, but the programs it funds are very important and very strategic. $3.3 billion for international security for Israel. I think it speaks for itself, and I've always been supportive of stabilizing the region. I continue to support a two-state solution, but I believe the security assistance is crucial. And I support the $110 million for the emergency refugee and migration assistance. I take issue and would look for the bar that the administration has put on Many states are suggesting that they not take refugees. Let me be very clear that Texas has taken refugees for as long as I've known. I've chaired a nonprofit organization called Interfaith Ministries, where one of our key components was providing for refugees and helping them to adjust to U.S. life. I support the $875 million for child survival and maternal health. That's one of the key elements that even was prominent during the fight against HIV in developing nations, is maternal to child transfer, and these are important elements. Support the $450 million for long-term drinking funding, as well as human trafficking dollars, $265 million, monies for the Caribbean, monies in particular for Peace Corps. I think that's one of the major components of our Face to the World. And let me indicate my support for several programs that I have seen in action when I've traveled overseas. One, the Charles R. Rangel International Affairs Program, that I was here when it was created and named after Congressman Charlie Rangel. The General Support, the USAID Donald M. Payne Fellowship. And I've seen these recipients in our embassies around the world. $40 million for the U.S. Institute of Peace. And I support the Cultural Exchange Program. Again, I've seen that at work, $640 million for educational and cultural diversity. I support the continuation for funding for HIV/AIDS, $4.88 billion, and I'm supporting the preservation of wildlife, $85 million, combating wildlife trafficking programs, hopefully in tribute to Cecil the lion who lost his life. I just want to conclude my remarks by saying, having the privilege of being part of the Helsinki Commission, the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, looking at issues of development and human rights and the rule of law, I believe that our foreign assistance is key to our position on democracy, the rule of law, and engagement with allies, where we develop more friends through engagement than we do through the acts of war. And I thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you very much, and I don't have any questions. Mr. Rogers, do you have any questions?
Thank you, gentlelady.
Thank you.
Thank you for appearing before us.
Thank you very much.
Where is she?
This is the last one.
Welcome. Welcome, Representative Chu of California, a member of the Ways and Means Committee. We thank you for testifying, and we'll be happy to place your full testimony in the record if you'd be kind enough to summarize your written statement. I want to make sure we have enough time to answer questions. Thank
Yes.
you.
Well, thank you so much, Chairwoman Lowy and Ranking Member Rogers. Thank you for the opportunity to come before this committee today as the representative of one of America's oldest and largest Armenian communities. I came here today in strong support of providing $10 million to continue America's successful and life-saving demining program in Nagorno-Karabakh. Over 30 years ago, as the Soviet Union was collapsing, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, an overwhelmingly Armenian enclave, were united in the goal of self-determination. But their peaceful movement was followed by violence and government-sponsored pogroms from Azerbaijan. And when the people of Nagorno-Karabakh voted for independence, they were met with war, the consequences which are still being felt today. Over the next 3 years, tens of thousands lost their lives, hundreds of thousands became refugees, and Nagorno-Karabakh became one of the most landmined areas of the former Soviet Union. These landmines and unexploded ordnance, UXOs, remain today, making it impossible or difficult to settle the land and lay the foundation of a stable state, and killing at least 383 civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh since 1995. Fortunately, America has the ability and the means to safely identify and remove these threats. With the support of USAID, the HALO Trust, a non-political and non-religious organization, has operated in Nagorno-Karabakh since 2000, clearing over 33,000 acres of former minefields. Thanks to HALO, over 3,500 landmines, 3,100 cluster munitions, and 7,600 items of unexploded or abandoned ordnance have been destroyed. But with at least 1.7 million square meters of contaminated areas still remaining, USAID is trying to end support for this program with little or no justification. For instance, in a recent letter defending the decision to shift focus away from demining, USAID told me there have been no reported civilian injuries or casualties from mines since 2017. But, in fact, there have been 10 civilian casualties in that time from landmines and an additional 2 from cluster munitions. And in just the past 12 months, there have been 12 near misses, like a farmer digging in his field, only to trigger a mine, causing great destruction. Thankfully, though, he survived. Another man was riding his horse when they hit a mine. Fortunately, the man survived, but the horse did not, demonstrating the ongoing threat from these mines. In that same letter, USAID justified their move away from demining by saying they wanted to shift focus to preparing populations for peace. But landmines and UXO are literal obstacles to that goal. Landmines exist to prevent peace and to make it impossible for the populations to settle, use land, and reduce tensions. That's why the U.S. has proudly been the world's largest supporter of humanitarian demining. This is a commitment we must not back away from, especially since we know that there is work left undone. This request of $10 million pales in comparison to the $100 million in security assistance given to Azerbaijan. So we can be sure that financial constraints are not the obstacle here. And it does not make sense to walk away from a program that USAID acknowledges has been successful while there are so many acres of land left to clear. If we are sincere in our commitment to peace, then we must support this request of $10 million, which would allow HALO to finish their work and remove the landmines and UXO that daily threaten the lives of civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh. Thank you for your consideration of this important request.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your appearing before us. Mr. Rogers?
Thank you for being here. Thanks for your statement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Anybody? That's it? Well, did we all learn something about the West view? I didn't know that. Did you know about that? That Ronald Reagan.
Yes, he was the first one on the west side.
He was the
but
first
they
one?
were working on the east side of the Capitol at the time, too.
Oh, was it an accident?
No, it wasn't an accident, but they weren't able to finish. They could have finished.
Oh, was that the reason?
There were 2 reasons. One of them, he wanted to be a much more beautiful view, and they were also more, are we? Careful.
Oh.
You're on live TV.
I was sworn in at the same time.